Hi, everybody. This is Panina Taylor, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on this week's Walk Through the Psalms. This is Walk Through the Psalms week 12, and today we're going to be looking at Psalms 15 and 16. Now, Psalm 15 is a very short psalm. It's only 5 verses, but it's a jam packed guide to how people of faith should live. Within these 5 verses are contained 11 principles which fall into the category of what is called in Hebrew, Ben Adam Lechavero. They're solely concerning man's relationship with his fellow man. The sages have said that the people of David's generation were righteous when it comes to observance. In other words, they were good at keeping the letter of the law. However, they would fall in battle because of the way that they related to their fellow man. This is contrasted with the people of King Ahab's generation, who were wicked idolaters, and yet they were victorious in battle with no casualties. This underlines the traditional understanding that God is pleased when the Jewish people are unified, even if it's in error, and God is displeased when we are divided. So David bookends the 11 principles with promises that those who live according to these principles may dwell in the temple and will never be moved. In other words, when one is meticulous in his interpersonal mitzvot, deeds, he's going to consequently be strengthened in his observance and his faith. Conversely, the only true way to serve God faithfully is to be careful in how one treats his fellow man. Makes sense, doesn't it? Since the whole purpose of society is to teach us how to relate to God. Now, ordinarily, one would think that since the number 14 is written as Yud Daled, Yud being the value of 10 and Daled having the value of 4, that 15 would be written as Yud and Hey. The problem is that Yud Hey is one of the sacred names for God. And so instead of writing the number 15 as 10 and 5, it's made of the Tet and the Vav, being 9 and 6, so as to make sure that the name of God is not being used wantonly or even commonly, which would be disrespectful. Okay, so let's take a look at Psalm 15, Mizmor Tet Vav. A song of David. O Lord, who will sojourn in your tent? Who will dwell upon your holy mount? He who walks uprightly and speaks righteousness and speaks truth in his heart. He did not slander with his tongue. He did his neighbor no harm, neither did he take up reproach against his kinsman. A base person is despised in his eyes, and he honors the God-fearing. He swears to his own hurt and does not retract. He did not give his money with interest, nor did he accept a bribe against the innocent. He who does these shall not falter forever. Here's another example of a psalm, by the way, where the introduction is not separated as its own verse in the Jewish translation. So the numbering is both the same in the Jewish translation and the Christian translation. Okay, let's take a look at verse 1. A song of David, O Lord, who will sojourn in your tent? Who will dwell on your holy mount? Now, since the words tent and holy mount are clearly references to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, and to the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, we seem to have a small problem because only the Kohanim and the Leviim, the priests and the Levites, lived in the temple, right? But there's no such distinction in this verse. That led the Radak to say that this is actually a reference to the soul abiding in the heavenly dwelling. He's saying that by living according to these principles here and now, a person's soul is assured of a place in heaven. So now, starting with verse 2, David lists the characteristics of those who will sojourn in the tent of Hashem and live on his holy mountain. Verse 2 says, He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks truth in his heart. The words walks uprightly, holech tamim, actually means to walk in innocence. The connotation being of one who doesn't involve himself in complicated schemes, but rather lives simply, trusting in God and whatever God sends his way. So in the Talmud, 8 of the 11 characteristics or principles that are outlined here are equated with a hero of Jewish history. And I'm going to share a few of those with you during the course of this talk that we're having. This first characteristic to walk in innocence is actually equated with Abraham. It says in Genesis Bereshit 17 verse 1 of Abraham, walk before me and be perfect in innocence. Works righteousness. The words Poal Tzedek could be translated as one who does what is right, or who is a righteous worker. The Radak explains that the first concept, a person who does what is right, is one who is scrupulous in acting righteously in his deeds. But the Talmud leans in the direction of the second understanding, that this is a person who is an honest worker and is scrupulously honest and righteous in his work. This trait is associated with and connected in the Talmud with somebody named Abba Chilkiah. Now, Abba Chilkiah was an early Tana, that is, that he was a writer of the Talmud. Okay, and he lived during the time of the Second Temple, and he was respected as a miracle worker by the sages of his generation, much like his grandfather, Choni HaMagiel. He was especially known for his great righteousness and honesty. For a living, he worked as a day laborer working in the fields, and he was obviously very poor. Even so, he was also very humble and refused to take credit for the miracles that are ascribed to him. And he was so scrupulous in his honesty at work that he even refused to respond to people's greetings when he was working, since he felt like it was cheating his employer who paid him by the hour. He's most well known as someone who would pray for rain and it would come. The last part of this verse speaks truth in his heart. Now, David is saying that this person is not only careful in his work, but also in his thoughts and his words. I found an interesting understanding on this phrase from the Radak. According to the Radak, this person, if he made a mental decision to do some good deed, even though he never made an oral commitment, he would still carry out his decision. In other words, he's true to his heart. This is much like the modern saying, live your truth. You have to be true to yourself. If, as the previous phrase says, you walk in innocence, you have no need to scheme or, like in this phrase, to pretend to be something that you're not in order to manipulate people or even situations. This person that David is describing is honest with himself. He only speaks truth in his heart, and he's honest with others. He speaks the truth of his heart. He doesn't put on airs or pretend to be something he isn't. One of the things that stops us from living truly fulfilled lives is that we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our own heart, our own intuition. But God gave us this intuition for a reason, as a gift. We are a complete package. And this will come up again. I'm going to tell you this a lot of times because it fits very well into the things that David is teaching. God gave us everything we need to be able to fulfill whatever our individual purpose for being created is. Have you ever bought an item from a store that requires batteries, and you open the package and you find that the batteries are not included? How frustrating is that, right? Especially when it means that we now have to go back to the store and buy batteries for the thing. And if we thought we were going to be able to use the item right away, but can't get back out to the store, so we have to wait for a while to be able to use the item, that is infuriating. But when the item comes with the batteries included, even when they're really cheap batteries that are only going to last a short time, it is such a relief, right? Well, the good news is that we, you and I, were created and packaged with the batteries included. God gave us everything that we need. We just need to know how to access it. And sometimes we also need to learn how to trust ourselves. This world seems to thrive on disempowering people. The less powerful some people become, the more powerful others feel. It's an illusion, though, because one person's power doesn't disable another person's power. We can all be powerful. That's the way God created the world. In fact, when we learn how to empower each other, we make the world a better place for everyone. But part of this process of becoming disempowered is that we begin to doubt ourselves. We stop trusting our own judgment, our own intuition. Stop listening to those voices that say you don't know. You do know. You know everything you need to know to make the decisions that are going to take you where you need to go. In fact, you are actually the only one who has all of the information pertinent to your success. And it's written into your DNA. You just have to trust yourself. Be a person who lives their truth. Speak the truth that's in your heart. Okay, verse 3. He did not slander with his tongue. He did his neighbor no harm. Neither did he take up reproach upon his kinsman. Now, he does not slander with his tongue. The sages say that this is clearly referring to the sin of Lashon Hara, or negative speech. Now, if we understand the previous verse as talking about a person who always speaks the truth, this is actually not such an easy feat. Keep in mind, and this is just a quick review for anyone who's not familiar with Lashon Hara, the laws of negative speech, that one of the key elements of Lashon Hara is that it is the truth. What? Hang on a second, Penina. If it's true, why can't we speak it? How many times has someone said something about another person and someone else said, no, that's not nice? And the response of the first person is, but it's true. Children say stuff like that all the time, right? Remarking about a person's physical appearance, intellectual deficiencies, social awkwardness, you name it. All of that may be true, but it's still forbidden according to the Torah. So why is it forbidden? Well, it all gets back to something we tend to forget, especially when we're traveling through our day on autopilot. That is, that our words are very powerful. God created us that way because it's a tool that we need to survive this physical existence. But it's also a responsibility that has to be very carefully managed. Like a chainsaw, right? One wrong move and we have killed someone. So here is the person who only speaks the truth and never engages in negative speech. This is a person who has clearly mastered his mind and his tongue. Now, Talmud relates this character trait to the patriarch Jacob, Yaakov. When Jacob's mother told him to impersonate his brother Esau in order to fool his father, Jacob objected. He said he did not want his father to regard him as a deceiver. Although the blessing he was to receive was precious to him, the truth was even dearer. In the end, he obeyed his mother, but according to Rashi, he only agreed to the impersonation after his mother had assured him that she had received a prophetic message to engage in the deception. All right, then it says, did his neighbor no harm? So who are the people that are hardest to get along with? Often it's those that we live the closest to, right? How easy it is to get fed up with a neighbor's baby who cries all night, or whose dog gets loose, or whose children keep kicking the ball into your garden, or at work, getting jealous of the coworker who got the better assignment or got the raise that you thought you deserved, or maybe in business, to be totally honest in business so as not to encroach on the rights of the business owner in the next door over. It's the neighbor, or fellow, as this word can be translated, who is the most difficult not to hurt. It's easy to want to get back at someone who bothers you because of your proximity. And yet, the person who is righteous will not use opportunities to harm such an individual. Next it says, nor cast disgrace upon his intimate. This phrase is contrasting the fellow who's close by proximity, but not necessarily in relationship. Here, David is referring to the closer, more intimate friend. The word used here, karov, is often used to mean a relative, but here it means like social intimacy and closeness rather than a blood relationship specifically. Often when a person is hurt or betrayed by those closest to him, he lashes out, right? That closeness that he had felt, multiplied by the pain of betrayal, often results in a person feeling freer to insult the other than if they were simply acquaintances. A man who's just gone through a divorce will often be far more derogatory about his ex-wife and feel freer to criticize her in public than he would feel about talking about, let's say a co-worker or a neighbor. The closeness of the relationship results in far more pain, and as a result takes much more self-control not to speak negatively about that person. The righteous person is careful to live and speak his truth without causing embarrassment or disgrace to someone he's been close to. All right, verse 4 says, a base person is despised in his eyes, and he honors the God-fearing. He swears to his own hurt, and he does not retract. A base person is despised in his eyes. Now here, the commentators again emphasize the total purity and honesty of the righteous person. Yes, he's scrupulously honest, but just as he withholds commenting the truth if it constitutes lashon hara, he does not do damage to his acquaintances or closer people who have betrayed him. He also calls a spade a spade. He's not given to pretending that someone is okay when what they're doing is wrong. He doesn't flatter the evildoer, appearing to condone or approve of such behavior. So how often do we see this in politics today, right? How often is a wicked person given honor either for the benefit of the person doing the honor or even to manipulate the person being honored, because when a person is honored and flattered, they're much more likely to comply with requests. We certainly see this today, where countries and their leaders who decades ago were shunned are now being courted by the West in order to be manipulated into agreeing to other things, right? The righteous person does not engage in these types of acts. I wonder if that means that there can be no such thing as a righteous politician, honestly. I mean, well, I'm not going to go there, okay? But it's a reasonable question. The next phrase, but those who fear God, he honors. Now, oftentimes, a person who is low in his own eyes will see others who are successful or righteous, and this applies to both categories, as competition or even a threat. They're going to try to feel better about themselves by pointing out any flaws they can find in the other person, no matter how trivial. Yes, she's very talented, but, or yes, he's a very good rabbi, but have you seen his horrible parenting skills? You get the idea. People don't like people who appear perfect, even if that person is humble, because the other people feel less in his presence or her presence. But the righteous person is humble in the truest sense. Humility is not about making yourself a doormat, and it's not about pretending that your positive attributes don't exist. True humility involves being able to make an accurate assessment of yourself, what we call cheshbon hanefesh, both the good and the bad. The righteous person isn't threatened by other people's skills and talents, and therefore he can honor the good he sees in others, and in this case, in others who truly fear God. Now, the Talmud equates this character trait with Yehoshaphat, king of Judah. According to tradition, whenever King Yehoshaphat would see a Torah scholar, he would rise up from his throne, kiss him, and cry out joyously, my father, my master, my master, my teacher, my teacher." Now it says, he who swears to his own hurt and does not capitulate. In this phrase, David is quantifying what constitutes one who fears God. The person who truly fears God will do what's right, even when that may endanger his own well-being. Oftentimes, such a person will give charity and deny himself any luxuries in order to do so. But it's not just that he's willing to sacrifice his own needs to do what is right or to provide for the needs of others. He also doesn't change. Once he's made a commitment, he holds to it no matter what. He understands the power of one's word, and that to live a life of integrity, a person has to honor the power that our words have and stand by our commitments no matter what the consequences. This person, the Talmud relates to Rabbi Yochanan, who avoided the honor of dining at the home of the leader of Israel. Therefore, he would take an oath not to partake of food until he arrived at his home. The vow gave him the strength he needed to avoid eating anywhere else, which could end up being a violation of his own humility. Verse 5 says, "He did not give his money with interest, nor did he accept a bribe against the innocent. He who does these shall not falter forever." Right? We'll break that down also. He who does not give his money with interest. Now, earlier in the psalm, David says that the righteous man does not inflict harm on his friend, right? So this could be understood to also include that he hasn't cheated or robbed his fellow. Now David says he hasn't even taken advantage of his fellow with his full consent and encouragement. The perfect example of this would be like giving a loan with interest. When a person takes out a loan, he's ready to agree to pay interest as the price for borrowing money, especially as an incentive to get the lender to give him the money, right? But the righteous man, says David, does not loan the money with interest, even if his fellow begs him to allow him to pay interest. The Radak comments that since the Torah has already banned the taking of interest from a fellow Jew, it cannot possibly be that David is simply praising one who's just obeying the letter of the law by refraining from what is expressly forbidden. In fact, the 11 attributes listed in this section are outlining what it means to go above and beyond the letter of the law. These are of the spirit of the law. So the Talmud says that this man not only doesn't take interest from his fellow Jew, but he also does not take interest from a Gentile. Rashi explains that once you become accustomed to taking interest, you can easily slip into taking it from Jews as well. Like many other prohibitions, even though the Torah only expressly forbids certain actions between Jews, such as taking interest on a loan or gossiping, it's a really good idea to avoid these behaviors altogether. The reason being, if we start doing them, we can create an appetite for them. And then, having accustomed our soul to participating in these behaviors when it's technically permitted, we could easily succumb to the temptation of doing it when it is expressly forbidden. Recognizing the potential damage these behaviors could have on the soul, the righteous man avoids them altogether. Next phrase says, "Nor did he accept a bribe against the innocent." Here again we have a situation where David must mean much more than the words reveal. Earlier in the psalm, he said that this person does no harm to anyone, neither to his acquaintances nor to friends or family for whom he may have a reason to do harm. Surely taking a bribe against the innocent would constitute doing harm, don't you think? So again, the Radak tells us that this is not about doing harm or injustice to an innocent man. That's covered by the halacha and by previous verses. This tzaddik, according to the Radak, will not take money even to right a wrong in which he had already intended to do so. The example is in a case of a judge who is already ready to exonerate an innocent person. Should someone come along and offer him a bribe, money, in order to secure his release, this judge would not take the money, since he had already had it in his mind to do this, to release the guy without the offer of a payment. This should serve as an example in all situations where we're intending on doing something as a chesed, a kindness, or even simply because it's the right thing to do. On the one hand, a Jew is required by halacha to pay someone if they perform a service that normally receives payment, even if they simply did it as a favor or out of kindness. But, says David, the righteous person, if he had already intended on doing this service for free, would not take payment, even if freely offered. What a dilemma. Now, a great example of this is a person, for example, who's looking for a new home. So he asks around, letting people know that he needs help finding a new place to live. Someone else hears of a house that's coming available and would be a perfect match for him. And so he sets up an appointment for his friend to see the house. The friend sees the house and decides to buy the house. Now, according to halacha, the purchaser owes his friend a finder's fee, similar to what he would have paid anyway to a real estate agent who would have been doing a search for him. But according to David, if his friend is righteous, he won't take it. Can you imagine the argument? Here, take it. No, I don't want it. Here, take it. No, I don't want it. My husband often tells a story that occurs frequently in Israel. An elderly man gets on the bus, right? And there's no more seats on the bus. So another man stands up and he offers his seat to the man who just got on. The only thing is that the man offering his seat is even older and more frail than the guy he offers it to. Inevitably, an amiable argument ensues where each of the two men is insisting that the other guy take the seat. No, you take the seat. No, you take the seat. Okay, so the Talmud says that Rabbi Ishmael ben Yossi personifies the man who takes every precaution against being influenced by bribes. The story is told in Ketubot 105b that Rabbi Ishmael ben Yossi had a sharecropper who brought him a basket of fruits every Friday as payment. Once, the sharecropper brought the fruits on a Thursday instead of Friday. So Rabbi Ishmael asked him why he had altered his route. The sharecropper explained that he had to appear before Rabbi Ishmael's court on that day, in any case, and therefore he brought the basket with him. Rabbi Ishmael refused to accept the fruits, even though they were his. He felt that this kindness done him in advancing the payment by one day might influence him in favor of the sharecropper, and as such would constitute bribery. Now King David ends the psalm by saying that whoever does these things shall forever not falter, or as in our translation here, not be moved. The order of the Hebrew words, lo yemot le'olam, he will not falter forever, could be understood to mean that even if he does falter, it won't be a permanent state. According to Rashi, a person who lives by these principles, no matter what happens, will always be raised once again. When Rabban Gamliel would come to this passage, he apparently would cry, saying, does this mean that only one who performed all of these shall not falter? But if he performed but one of them, he may still falter? Rabbi Akiva responded that this promise holds true for even a person who performs just one of them, because it does not say he who does all of these, it only says he who does these. And it could be understood to mean he who does one of these. The thing that we can really take away from this psalm, and what I hope you will take away from it, is that it's how one treats his fellow man that determines who is righteous. There's a saying in Judaism, ein derech eretz, ein Torah, which means if there is no common courtesy, loose translation for the word derech eretz, there is no Torah. Even though learning Torah alone is valuable, if one does not treat his fellow man in a righteous manner, he negates all the Torah learning he's done, because really, if the Torah doesn't teach us how to behave towards one another, have we really learned the Torah at all? So now we're going to take a look at Psalm 16. This is Mizmor Tet Zion. Now this psalm feels like a continuation of the previous psalm in many ways. Psalm 15 told us what characteristics embodied a righteous person and ended by assuring the reader that those who lived according to these principles would not falter. Here in Psalm 16, which feels very much like a prayer designed for all of us, David mentions that he can trust in God who will not allow him to falter. Like Psalm 15, the numbering for Psalm 16 is not what we might expect. It would make sense to write the number 16 as 10 and 6, which would be Yud Vav. However, Yud Vav is also the name of God, and so, just as in 15 we wrote Tet Vav, for 16 we write Tet Zion, which is 9 and 7. These are the only two numbers which are written this way. Okay, let's look at Psalm 16, or Mizmor Tet Zion. A michtam of David, O God, guard me, for I have taken refuge in you. You should say to the Lord, you are my master. My good is not incumbent on you. For the holy ones who are in the earth and the mighty ones in whom is all my delight. May the sorrows of those who hasten after another deity increase. I will not pour their libations of blood, nor will I take up their names upon my lips. The Lord is my allotted portion and my cup. You guide my destiny. Portions have fallen to me in pleasant places. Even the inheritance pleases me. I will bless the Lord who counseled me. Even at night my conscience instructs me. I have placed the Lord before me constantly. Because he is at my right hand, I will not falter. Therefore my heart rejoiced and my soul was glad. Even my flesh shall dwell in safety. For you shall not forsake my soul to the grave. You shall not allow your pious one to see the pit. You shall let me know the way of life, the fullness of joys in your presence. There is pleasantness in your right hand forever. Okay, so now let's walk through this psalm. A michtam of David. O God, guide me, for I have taken refuge in you. So the first thing we want to know here is, what on earth is a michtam? Well, apparently no one knows for sure, but Rashi offers a few explanations. Since Rashi usually defaults to the simple explanation, he maintains that a michtam is a special musical arrangement for this psalm. The Radak, whose explanation doesn't diverge too much, says that it's actually a special musical instrument. But of course, the verse doesn't say on the michtam. It says that it is a michtam of David, meaning that Rashi's first explanation makes the most sense grammatically. There are other explanations which refer to the etymology of the word michtam, relating it to other various words and roots and combinations, just so you know. All right, he continues by saying, O God, guard me, for I have taken refuge in you. The Sfas Emes comments on this verse that even a person who lacks the good deeds which would grant him a certain level of divine protection, when a person comes to God asking for protection and trusting in him alone, that one act of trusting in God alone makes up for all the good deeds that a person may do. Taking refuge in God and God alone is merit enough for him to provide protection. Now, I don't know about you, but I know how often and how much I fall short of where I'm supposed to be. Knowing that in spite of my failings, if I simply trust God and God alone, not only my brain, not my skills, not my personality, not my money, not anything or anyone else, but only God is enough to merit his protection, and that is a comforting thought, or at least it should be. Of course, then I've got the challenge of truly trusting him. But don't overthink it. Just trust. Simple, pure trust. Verse 2 says, You should say to the Lord, You are my master. My good is not incumbent upon you. A more accurate translation might be, You have said to the Lord, My master, you are not obliged to do me good. When one takes the attitude that God is the master of all, and as our master, he doesn't owe us anything, then all good that master does is a kindness. Such humility takes no credit for the good that God grants us. Here we see another glimpse into the soul of King David, because he was one of the most humble men that ever lived, and he's constantly bringing us back to the fact that God is in charge, and we are constantly falling short, and God is always doing good to us, but not because we deserve it, rather because he is gracious and kind. All right, verse 3. For the holy ones who are in the earth and the mighty ones in whom is all my delight. The first two verses, David told us that even when we fall short in our merits, simply taking refuge in God is enough to trust that he will protect us. But in verse 2, God's not obligated to do any good for us. That this good that he does is simply a chesed, the result of God being who he is. Here, David refers to his forefathers. those who have gone before him, and he delights in everything they stood for and everything they taught him. Now, another way of translating this last phrase is, all my desires are due to them. In other words, David's saying, it is only because of the righteousness of my forefathers, the values I've been taught, that I am who I am. All my good deeds, my trust in God, anything that may even appear to be a merit to me, is really a merit to those who came before me. Without them, I would not be who I am, and I would not have any good deeds to be credited to me. So I sure am glad that my trusting in you is really enough, because really when it all comes down to it, that's all I've got. Verse 4 says, may the sorrows of those who hasten after another deity increase. I will not pour their libations of blood, nor will I take their name upon my lips. It is so obvious to David that God is in charge, and he's just made the point that really it doesn't take much to be on God's side. One doesn't need to be perfect, only to trust. And now David requests of God that God would increase the sorrows of those who practice idolatry and don't recognize that God is the master of all. Do what you need to do, says David, to show them that you are the master of all and the creator of the universe. Cause them to want to seek after you. Contrasting those who offer sacrifices to other gods, David continues with verse 5. The Lord is my allotted portion and my cup. You guide my destiny. Now, there are those who run after other gods, but David says that it is God alone who fulfills all his needs. To get some insight into the distinctions in the word choice here, we have to take a look at the Hebrew. First, David says that Hashem is his allotted portion. The Hebrew word for portion here is chelke or chelek. It's that which is assigned to you without any effort on your part. The chelek is what is determined for you. The word chelek has the connotation of that which is equally distributed. The word kos is what is translated in this version as cup. It's also translated as share. The Malbim says that a share is something that a person has prepared for himself. And finally, the word translated as destiny is goral, which is actually a lottery or a lot. It's something that can be distributed unevenly to the recipients, some getting more and some getting less. So David's word choice in this verse has been very carefully chosen. He's saying that whether it is that which I believe I have prepared for myself, that which seems to be coming to me without any particular merit, and even that which happens by accident, all three, it's all from God. Even that lottery, which appears to be completely random, that too has been determined by God. Going back 2 verses, this too is part of what it means to take refuge in or to trust God. Verse 6 says, portions have fallen to me in pleasant places. Even the inheritance pleases me. David just finished saying that even what appears to happen randomly is determined by God. And now he's saying that he's happy with what he has received because he understands that it is what God has chosen for him. When we can truly see that everything we have is a gift from God, and we can understand that even though it may or may not be what we ourselves would have chosen, we can still be contented with it. In fact, we have to learn how to be content. That, of course, does not mean that we stop trying to do more or even to gain more. One can be content without being satisfied. One can be content with what he has and still be driven to do more good in the world, and even to acquire more in order to be able to do more good. Verse 7 says, I will bless the Lord who counseled me. Even at night, my conscience instructs me. When a person is content with what they have, they thank God, whom they recognize as the giver of all that they have not chosen, and the one who gave them the wisdom to make choices, and therefore the one who has influenced the choices he makes. It's important to point out here that God created us complete. All right, I think I mentioned this earlier. He gave us all the resources we need to make the right decisions in our lives. So many people feel lost or incomplete or inadequate, but being created in the image of God means that He's equipped you to be able to make the choices and decisions that you need to make. In the end, though, your conscience, the part of you that reasons and makes decisions, is always being informed by God. He's the source to whom you're connected. So here David is acknowledging that even the gift of intuition, which he possesses and which allows him to make the right decision, even that comes from God. It's like we have our own private life coach. God gives us feelings and knowledge and the ability to make decisions so that we can choose. He advises us, He coaches us, but He's already put into us what we need. David finishes the psalm with the final 4 verses, a praise to God. He says, I have placed the Lord before me constantly because He is at my right hand. I will not falter. Therefore my heart rejoiced and my soul was glad. Even my flesh shall dwell in safety. For you shall not forsake my soul to the grave. You shall not allow your pious one to see the pit. You shall let me know the way of life, the fullness of joys in your presence. There is pleasantness in your right hand forever. David's theme of the idea that everything comes from God is complete with these last verses of praise. Because everything comes from God, and He protects the one who takes refuge in Him, and He counsels the one who trusts in Him. David says, I know then that I can trust that everything is going to turn out okay, because I've placed Hashem before me. And having done that, the rest is up to God. It's all good, as they say. It's all good. All right, well, with that, we complete both Psalms 15 and 16 for today. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on this journey that we're on as we walk through the Psalms. We're getting ready to start our next section. And so I would like to just remind you that it's not too late for people to sign up if you are getting a lot out of this and think you know that someone who might also get a lot out of it and might enjoy it. Please tell them to sign up. I'm going to give you the link below here, and you can click, you can forward them the link, and they can sign up. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next week as we walk through the Psalms.